The house on the edge of town stood like a shadow against the twilight sky, tucked away in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, nestled behind rows of neatly trimmed hedges and a white picket fence. It appeared as the picture of normalcy, a perfect home for a perfect family. But within the walls of the home, something was quietly festering, something dark, something that would soon shatter the fragile illusion of suburban happiness. Chris West had always appeared like the type of man you'd want as your neighbor. Charismatic, hardworking, the kind of guy who could charm anyone with his warm smile and easygoing attitude. He was a family man married to Shanann, a woman who exuded positivity and grace. And together they had two beautiful daughters, Bella and Celeste. Their life, from the outside, seemed perfect. But perfection, as they would soon discover, was a fragile lie. It all began on a summer evening in August. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside the house, Shanann was upstairs, putting the girls to bed. Chris was downstairs, trying to wind down after a long day of work. But something was wrong. He could feel it gnawing at him deep inside. The weight of the silence in the house felt suffocating, like the calm before an inevitable storm. In the living room, Chris sat on the couch, his mind racing. The tension had been building for weeks. Shanann had been acting distant, and he knew it wasn't just the stress of her job or the responsibilities of raising two young children. No, there was something deeper, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. And then there was the affair, the one he had been carrying on in secret. It started innocently enough, a few innocent messages, some flirtatious exchanges, but it quickly escalated. He'd found himself pulled into the whirlwind of another woman's attention. A woman who made him feel seen, understood, desired in a way Shanann hadn't in months. Her name was Nicole, and she was everything Shanann wasn't. But Chris's affair had gone unnoticed until now. As he sat there, his mind wandering between the memories of Nicole's touch and the coldness that had begun to form between him and Shanann, a thought hit him. This couldn't continue. Something had to give. The pressure was too much. He needed to end it all, to escape the suffocating grip of the life he had created with Shanann and the girls. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. That night, Chris lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room felt too small, the walls closing in. He listened to the soft hum of the air conditioning, the faint sound of Shanann's breathing beside him, the peaceful noises of the house. But it was all a lie. His life was crumbling, and the weight of his own guilt was unbearable. Then he heard it. A soft thud from upstairs. It wasn't unusual, just the house settling, or perhaps one of the girls getting out of bed. But in that moment, it felt ominous. Chris's heart began to race. He listened intently, waiting for more sounds, but there was nothing. The house had returned to its eerie silence. At that moment, he made his decision. The next morning, the sun rose slowly, casting a golden glow across the quiet neighborhood. Birds chirped, and the smell of fresh-cut grass filled the air. But inside the house, everything was different. Chris had spent the night in turmoil, wrestling with his thoughts, but now there was no turning back. Shanann had already left for a business trip earlier in the day, taking the girls with her. Chris was alone at home, alone with his thoughts, alone with the plans he had made. He stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the wall. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead as his mind raced. He could hear the faint sound of traffic in the distance, but it felt so far away. His phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Nicole. "How's everything going?" For a moment, Chris stood still, staring at the screen, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had been living a lie for so long, and now The consequences were coming for him. He couldn't take it anymore. It was time to end the life he had built, the life that had become a prison to him. As the day dragged on, Chris's nerves began to unravel. He checked the time constantly, waiting for the moment when he would no longer be able to stop what he was planning. When the clock struck 3 p.m., the decision was made. He left his phone on the counter, picked up his keys, and walked out the door. He was going to see Nicole, to escape the chaos, to finally break free. But as he stepped outside, a chill wind cut through the air, sending a shiver down his spine. Chris drove through the quiet streets, his grip on the steering wheel tight. The cool evening air from the cracked window didn't ease the pressure building in his chest. He could still feel the weight of what he was about to do. He had promised himself that this would be the last time. The last time he'd ever have to lie, sneak, or live with the guilt that had begun to consume him. Nicole had promised him freedom, freedom from Shanann, freedom from the life he had built, the prison he had locked himself in. But was it really freedom? His thoughts were racing, but the drive felt like it was in slow motion. It was as though time itself was stretching out, unwilling to let him reach the moment of no return. Every turn of the wheel felt deliberate, yet automatic. The darkened streets outside of his car window seemed to blur together as he passed by them, every flicker of streetlight casting a shadow over his thoughts. As he neared the exit, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't from Nicole. It was from Shanann. "I miss you. Can't wait to be home tomorrow. The girls miss you too. Are we still on for dinner?" Chris stared at the message for a moment, his pulse quickening. His heart sank. He had been so close to leaving it all behind, but now her words were a painful reminder of the family he was about to betray forever. The guilt gnawed at him. The dark side of his mind told him that it was too late. He had already made the choice. The die had been cast. His finger hovered over the screen for a moment, the temptation to write back something, anything, gnawing at him. "I miss you too. I'm looking forward to it." He could say it, play the part of the loving husband one last time, but the lie would be too much. It always was. Chris tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. He couldn't answer her. Not now. Not when he was on his way to see Nicole. When he pulled up to Nicole's apartment complex, his heart was pounding, not with excitement, but with the weight of everything. The thing about secrets was that they always made the world feel smaller. And now, every turn, every move he made felt like it was leading him closer to the edge of an abyss. Nicole was waiting for him when he arrived. She was everything Shanann wasn't. Carefree, spontaneous, full of energy. The two of them had been inseparable these last few weeks, finding solace in each other's arms, comfort in the whirlwind affair that had blossomed from innocent flirtation. "You're late," Nicole teased as she opened the door, her smile wide and inviting. Chris didn't smile back. His eyes were distant. The guilt he had buried deep inside was now impossible to ignore. He stepped inside, forcing himself to act normal, to forget about Shanann and the girls for just a few more hours. But in the back of his mind, their faces lingered. The thought of Bella and Celeste's innocent eyes, the way they looked up at him, trusting and unaware of what was coming, it twisted something inside him. "Is everything okay?" Nicole asked, noticing his silence. Chris swallowed hard, looking away. "Yeah, just tired." He could feel her hand on his arm, her touch soft and comforting. For a moment, he let himself lean into it, but it was only a moment. "I don't want to be here anymore," Chris blurted out before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Nicole raised an eyebrow, looking confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm done with it all," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Shanann, the kids, the life I've built. I want out, Nicole. I can't keep living this lie." Nicole stared at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped closer, her hands gently cupping his face. "You know I want you to be with me," she said softly. "But we can't just rush this. There's a lot at stake here. You have a family. You're talking about destroying everything." Chris nodded, but deep down, he knew that wasn't the truth. He wasn't talking about destroying everything, he was talking about escaping it. He wanted to break free from the suffocating grip of his own decisions, from the guilt, from the lies. But most of all, he wanted to break free from Shanann's love that had once felt so unconditional, so safe, but had grown heavy, suffocating. "I don't care," he muttered. "I'm done. I just want to be free." Nicole hesitated. Her fingers traced along his jawline, her touch sending a shiver down his spine. But there was something in her eyes, now a flicker of doubt. "Chris, are you sure about this? You can't just walk away from everything." "I've already walked away," he said, his voice cold. "The moment I started this affair, I left." Nicole said nothing, but the silence stretched between them. Chris's thoughts were loud now, pounding in his head. He could hear Shanann's voice again. "Are we still on for dinner?" The unease in his stomach grew. He knew he couldn't stay here forever. The darkness inside him had already started to consume everything. His marriage, his family, his life, it was all slipping away. The weight of his decision pressed on him like a physical force. Nicole stepped back, her arms crossed. "What's going to happen to your family?" Chris exhaled sharply. "I don't know, but it's not my problem anymore." As the words left his lips, he felt the truth settle over him. He had already crossed the point of no return. There was no going back now. The apartment was suffocating. Nicole's apartment, once a place of fleeting comfort and excitement, now felt like a cage. Chris had been pacing for what seemed like hours. The weight of his decisions pressed heavily on his chest, each breath harder than the last. The moment of freedom he had hoped for, the escape from his family, was turning into something he hadn't anticipated: fear. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't from Nicole. It was a text from Shanann. "I love you, miss you so much. I hope you're doing okay. Please call me when you get the chance. I've been thinking about us a lot." Chris stared at the screen for a moment, his eyes burning with guilt. The message was a simple one, yet it shattered him. It was the message of a woman who trusted him completely, a woman who believed in their family, in their life together. But that life was a lie, and he had no idea how to fix it. No idea how to unmake the decisions he had already made. He tossed the phone aside and ran his hands through his hair. Nicole was watching him from the couch, her eyes narrowing with growing suspicion. "Chris, what's going on?" she asked, her voice low. There was a sharp edge to it now, a tone of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "I can't do this," Chris muttered. His voice cracked, betraying the rawness of his emotions. He turned away from Nicole, walking to the window and staring out into the night. The darkness outside matched the darkness inside him. There was no escape from this. Nicole stood up and approached him cautiously. She reached out, touching his shoulder. "What do you mean you can't do this? You wanted this. We talked about this. You said you wanted out." Chris turned sharply, his eyes wild, his face pale. "I didn't know what I wanted," he hissed. "I thought I could leave it all behind, but I can't. I'm in too deep. I can't escape what I've done, and now it's too late." Nicole recoiled, her expression shifting from confusion to frustration. "So what? Now you're going to back out?" After everything we've talked about, after everything we've been through. The anger in her voice cut through him, but he couldn't stop himself. It's not about that. It's about them, Shanann, the girls. I've ruined everything. I've ruined us. I can't go back. Nicole's face hardened. She took a step back, her arms folding across her chest. You know what? You're right. You can't go back. But you're also right about something else. You've ruined everything. And you're not going to walk away from this. Not now. Not after you've already made your choice. Chris stumbled backward, his breath coming in short gasps. The pressure was too much. The lies, the guilt, the fear, it all started to close in on him. He felt dizzy, like the world was spinning around him. Chris, listen to me, Nicole said, her voice softer now. She took a step forward, her hands reaching for his. You can't just walk away from this. You've already crossed the line. You need to see this through. But Chris wasn't listening anymore. His mind was consumed with one thought: escape. He had to escape, but escape from what? From the family he had destroyed, from the lies he had built his life on. There was no way out now. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Shanann. For a moment, he stared at the screen, paralyzed. His mind screamed at him to answer it, to tell her the truth, to confess everything. But he couldn't. Not yet. He couldn't let her know what he was capable of. The phone rang again, louder this time, more insistent. Finally, with trembling hands, Chris picked it up. Hello, he said, his voice shaky. Chris Shanann's voice was warm, filled with concern. Where are you? I've been trying to reach you. I've been so worried. The words hit him like a physical blow. The image of Shanann, sitting alone in their home, waiting for him, trusting him he couldn't face her. Not now. I'm sorry, Chris said, his voice barely audible. I just needed some space. I'll be home soon. I just need to think. Shannan's voice softened. I understand, Chris. But please, come home soon. The girls miss you. I miss you. Her words felt like a vice tightening around his chest. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell her everything. Tell her that he didn't love her anymore. Tell her that he was leaving. Tell her that he was already planning to destroy everything they had built. But the words wouldn't come. I'll be home soon, he said again, his voice hollow. He ended the call before Shanann could say anything more. Nicole watched him with growing intensity, sensing that something had shifted. You're not going back, are you? She asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. Chris didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. The truth was, he didn't know what to do anymore. The more he tried to walk away from his past, the more it came crashing back into his life, dragging him deeper into the abyss. And then the phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't from Shanann. It was a message, a picture of Bella and Celeste. The image was a snapshot from a recent family outing, perfect moment frozen in time. The girls were smiling, their faces full of innocence, their eyes wide with trust and love. It was the last thing he ever wanted to see. His vision blurred. The guilt was unbearable. Nicole leaned in, glancing at the screen over his shoulder. You can't just leave, Chris, she said, her voice cold now. Not after this. The room felt smaller. The walls felt like they were closing in on him. He could feel the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He had crossed a line he could never come back from. And it wasn't just his family he was betraying. It was himself. The night stretched on like an unbroken void, the ticking of the clock the only sound in the apartment. Chris's mind raced, but every thought felt like it was suffocating him. The picture of Bella and Celeste was burned into his brain, their innocent smiles haunting him. His chest tightened, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he might break down and confess everything. He might call Shanann, apologize, beg for forgiveness. But even that felt impossible. Nicole stood silently by the window, watching him, her face cold, unreadable. The weight of the situation was settling between them like an unspoken truth. There was no turning back now. Chris could feel it. He had crossed a line, and everything was about to crumble. "I can't do this," he muttered, his voice hoarse. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone again, staring at Shannon's message one more time. "I miss you. Please call me soon. I love you." His finger hovered over the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to call her. He couldn't leave her hanging, but he didn't want to tell her the truth. He wasn't sure he was capable of facing her. His own reflection in the darkened window seemed alien, a stranger wearing the skin of someone he used to know. Nicole's voice broke through his thoughts, low and urgent. "Chris, don't do this. Don't go back to her." He didn't answer. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, of guilt and desire, of escape and consequence. He was suffocating under the weight of everything he had done. But even as his heart screamed for a way out, he knew one thing: there was no escape. There was no going back to the life he had before. He had already ruined everything. "I'm going back," he said, his voice low and almost broken. He looked up at Nicole, who stood frozen, her eyes wide. "I have to." Her expression shifted something between anger and disappointment. "You can't just leave me like this, Chris. After everything we've talked about, after everything you said, you're not just going to walk away." Chris's eyes hardened. "I'm not walking away. I'm fixing this. I'm going to fix it all." Nicole took a step back, her face a mask of disbelief. "Fix it? How do you think you can fix this? You can't fix what's already broken. You can't fix you." The harsh words hit him harder than anything else she could have said. Nicole was right, he realized. He couldn't fix anything. He couldn't fix the destruction he had already caused. All he could do now was ride the wave of his decisions, knowing that it was too late to stop. "I'm sorry, Nicole," he whispered, the words sounding weak even to his own ears. "I'm sorry, but I can't be here anymore." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked toward the door, his body moving like a machine, his mind numb. The door clicked shut behind him with a finality that echoed in his ears. There was no going back. Outside, the night air felt colder, sharper. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. Chris walked to his car, his steps slow, deliberate. Every movement felt like it was happening in slow motion, as though the world was watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. He was a man caught in the middle of something much larger than himself, something that had already begun to consume him. His phone buzzed again, pulling him out of his thoughts. "Shanann, where are you? Please, we need to talk. I'm worried. The girls miss you. I miss you." The words seemed to echo in his mind. The guilt was suffocating, and for a brief moment, Chris thought he might collapse under its weight. His thumb hovered over the screen, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he thought about telling the truth. To tell Shanann everything, to tell her how much he had messed up, how far he had fallen. But then the image of Nicole flashed in his mind. The comfort, the desire, the way she made him feel like he mattered. And in that moment, he knew he couldn't go back. He had already chosen his path. He typed a quick message, "I'll be home soon." The words felt hollow as he hit send. The message was a lie. He wasn't coming home soon. He wasn't sure when Orify would ever come home again. The drive home felt endless. His thoughts were a jumble of guilt, fear, and anger. Every turn, every stop sign, felt like another moment wasted, another moment that he couldn't get back. He could almost feel Shanann's eyes on him, the weight of her unspoken questions pressing down on him. She would want answers. She would want to know what happened, why he had pulled away. But he didn't have answers. Not anymore. He only had more lies. When Chris finally pulled into the driveway, the house stood before him, silent and dark. The lights inside were off, but the shadows of the past few days seemed to linger in the corners, waiting for him to face them. He sat in the car for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his chest tight with dread. He had no idea what he was about to walk into, but he knew one thing for sure. It wasn't going to be easy. With a final, shaky breath, he got out of the car and walked toward the door, the cold air biting at his skin. As he stepped inside, he saw Shanann standing at the top of the stairs, her face pale, her eyes filled with concern. She looked so vulnerable, so trusting. And in that moment, Chris felt the full weight of what he was about to destroy. Shanann didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, her eyes searching, as if waiting for him to speak, to explain. But Chris couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. He could feel the suffocating silence between them, the divide that had grown so wide over the past few weeks. "I'm here," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Shanann nodded, but there was something in her eyes now, something different. She knew, she had to know. The air between them had shifted, and he could feel it. Her next words were soft, but they felt like a knife. "Where have you been, Chris? What's going on?" And in that moment, Chris realized there was no escaping the truth anymore. Not for him, not for anyone. The silence in the house felt thick, suffocating. Shanann stood at the top of the stairs, her eyes locked on Chris. She hadn't moved, and neither had he. It was as though the entire house held its breath, waiting for anything to happen. The air was heavy with expectation, with the unspoken question that hung between them. What was he going to say? Chris stood frozen in the doorway, his heart pounding in his chest. Every step forward felt like a step deeper into a nightmare. He had tried to ignore it for so long, tried to bury it, but now there was no running away. No more lies. The truth was staring him in the face, waiting to be revealed. I'm here," Chris said again, his voice barely above a whisper. He hated how weak it sounded, how hollow it felt. Shanann's expression didn't soften, but she didn't move either. She just watched him, her gaze piercing. "Where have you been, Chris?" Shanann's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now. She had been asking him this question for days, each time more urgently than the last. But tonight, there was something different in her tone. She wasn't just asking out of concerns. She was asking because she knew something was wrong. And she wasn't going to let him hide from it anymore. Chris's throat tightened, the words catching in his chest. The weight of what he had done crushed him. He couldn't look her in the eye. He couldn't face her, not like this. Not after everything he had done. Chris stopped, his mouth dry. He had to say something, anything. He couldn't just stand there. "I needed some space, Shanann. I've been feeling overwhelmed with everything." Shanann didn't move, didn't blink. She just stared at him, as if trying to decipher his words, to understand what was happening. She was waiting for more, but Chris didn't have more to give. The lie was the only thing he could cling to now. "I don't believe you," Shanann said softly, her voice cutting through him like a blade. The simple words sent a shockwave through his chest. She knew, she had to know. Her eyes searched his face, as though she could see the guilt etched in every line, every twitch of his expression. She took a step forward, and Chris instinctively took a step back. The space between them felt monumental now, as though an insurmountable wall had been built up between them, brick by brick, with every lie he had told, with every moment he had hidden the truth. "Chris, what's going on?" she asked again, her voice shaking now. "What's really going on? Where were you tonight? Why are you acting like this?" Chris wanted to tell her. He wanted to say it all, to confess, to beg for her forgiveness. He wanted to fall to his knees and tell her everything, how he had betrayed her, how he had chosen Nicole over their family, how he had destroyed everything they had built. But the words wouldn't come. He couldn't bring himself to say them. I don't know," Chris muttered, his voice weak. "I just needed some time to think, to figure things out." Shanann's eyes narrowed. "Think about what? About us? About your family? Because right now, I'm not seeing any of that. I'm not seeing the man I married. I'm not seeing the father of my children. You're acting like a stranger." The words hit him harder than anything. She was right. He was a stranger, not just to her, but to himself. He didn't recognize the man who stood in front of her. He didn't know who he had become. Shanann stepped forward, her face crumpling with pain. "Chris, please, just tell me the truth. I can't keep living like this. I can't keep wondering what's going on in your head. Why are you doing this to us?" And that was at the breaking point. Chris's entire world seemed to shatter in that moment. The weight of his guilt, his fear, his shame, all of it came crashing down on him at once. He could feel his heart racing, his stomach churning. His whole body was on fire, consumed by the need to escape, to make everything stop, to make her stop asking, stop pushing him to face the truth. Chris's voice cracked, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he might break. The tears welled up in his eyes, but he couldn't let them fall. He had to stay strong. He had to hold it together, at least for a little while longer. "You're hiding something from me," Shanann said quietly, her voice trembling. She reached out, her hand resting on his arm, her touch gentle but firm. "What is it, Chris? Please, I need to know. What are you hiding?" Chris swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He wanted to scream, to tell her everything, to end the charade. But something inside him, something dark and powerful, kept him silent. He couldn't do it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "I'm not hiding anything," he lied, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. He could feel the weight of every lie he had ever told her, every word that had twisted the truth, every excuse that had built the wall between them. Shanann stepped back, her face pale with disbelief. She was shaking her head, slowly, as if she couldn't understand how he could stand there and lie to her so icily, so convincingly. "I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. The pain in her words was raw, jagged, and it pierced him to the core. "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Chris felt the world tilt beneath him. The ground felt unstable, as if he might collapse at any moment. He could see the tears welling in Shanann's eyes, the hurt she was hiding behind the anger. It was too much. He couldn't take it anymore. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though the words felt hollow. He didn't know what he was sorry for. For everything, for nothing. His mind was a blur. Shanann looked at him one last time, her face full of pain, of disappointment. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," she said quietly, before turning and walking away. The sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty house was the final nail in the coffin. Chris stood frozen, his heart racing, his body numb. It was over. The life he had known, The family he had built was all slipping away, slipping through his fingers like sand. And in that moment, he realized there was no coming back. Chris stood motionless in the hallway, the sound of Shanann's retreating footsteps still echoing in his ears. Her words rang in his mind. "I don't know who you are anymore." The simple truth of those words hit him harder than anything else. In that moment, he realized just how far gone he truly was. The facade he had carefully constructed, the life he had fought to preserve, had crumbled like dust in his hands. He had lost her. He had lost everything. As the seconds stretched into minutes, Chris could feel the panic rising in his chest. His mind raced, trying to grasp at anything that could pull him back from the brink. But it was too late. The finality of Shannan's words had sealed his fate. Shannan had left the room, her presence now just a painful reminder of all that he had lost. He wanted to go after her, to beg her, to plead with her for one more chance. But he couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The silence in the house was deafening. A flash of movement caught his eye. It was Bella, standing in the doorway of the living room, her small face filled with confusion. She was holding one of her dolls, the plastic eyes staring at Chris, as if they too were waiting for an explanation that he didn't have. "Daddy." Bella's voice was soft, innocent, filled with that unspoken trust that only a child could have. "Where's Mummy?" Chris's chest tightened. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, the weight of her tiny hands gripping the doll. The guilt washed over him in waves. Bella and Celeste, they were just children. They didn't deserve any of this. They didn't deserve the chaos he had brought into their lives. She's just tired, sweetie," Chris said, his voice shaky. It was a lie, but he didn't know how to tell her the truth. How could he explain to a little girl that her mother was falling apart because of him? How could he explain that everything he had done was slowly tearing their family apart? Bella looked up at him, her eyes wide and trusting. She didn't understand. She didn't know how close they were to the edge. But Chris did, and it terrified him. "I'll go talk to her," Chris said, his voice barely above a whisper. But even as he said the words, he knew it wouldn't help. It was too late. Shannan had made her decision, and he had made his. He walked slowly toward the stairs, his legs feeling like lead. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his mind was numb, consumed by the realization that everything was falling apart. His family, his marriage, his life, all of it was slipping away. He reached the top of the stairs and saw Shannan sitting on the edge of their bed, her back to him. She hadn't changed out of her clothes, and her shoulders were hunched, as though she was trying to make herself small. The sight of her, so vulnerable and broken, made something inside Chris twist painfully. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He didn't know what to say. He had already said everything, and yet nothing had changed. Shannan had already made up her mind. She had already seen through his lies, through the charade he had built around himself. "I'm sorry," he finally said, the words sounding hollow in the stillness of the room. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Shannan didn't look at him. She didn't even move. She just stared straight ahead, her eyes distant, as though she was somewhere far away. "Then why did you do it, Chris?" Shannan's voice was a whisper, but it cut through him like a knife. "Why did you lie? Why did you leave me, leave us, for her?" Chris flinched at her words. The pain in her voice was almost too much to bear. He wanted to tell her everything, to explain why he had done what he had done, but he couldn't find the words. There were no words that could make this right. I was confused," he said weakly. "I don't know what happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Confused, Shanann scoffed bitterly, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was no anger in them, just a deep, aching sadness. You don't get to be confused, Chris. You don't get to destroy everything and then claim you were confused. Chris wanted to respond, but there was nothing left to say. Shanann was right. He had no excuse. There was no way to explain the chaos he had caused, the way he had let everything slip through his fingers. "I never thought it would end like this," he said quietly, the words tasting foreign in his mouth. He took a step closer to her, but Shanann stood up quickly, backing away from him. "I don't want to hear your excuses, Chris. I don't want to hear your sorrows anymore. I've heard enough of them." The words stung. Each one felt like a slap to his face. Shanann was done. She was finished. And as much as he hated it, he knew she was right. He had no right to ask for forgiveness, no right to ask for another chance. He had burned every bridge. There was nothing left. "You need to leave," Shanann said, her voice firm, final. "I don't want you here anymore." Chris felt his heart shatter. He had known this moment was coming, but it still hit him like a freight train. Shanann didn't want him anymore. His family didn't want him anymore. The life he had known, the life he had tried to hold on to, was gone. He stood frozen in place, staring at Shanann. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. He didn't know where to go, but he didn't need to go anywhere. He was already gone. As Chris turned and walked out of the room, he heard Shanann's quiet sobs behind him, and something inside him broke. The door slammed behind him, and he found himself standing alone in the hallway, his chest tight with despair. The weight of his decisions bore down on him, suffocating him. There was no redemption for him, no escape. He had lost everything. The house felt like a prison now. Chris wandered through its empty hallways, the silence pressing down on him with the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. Every room seemed to echo with the ghosts of his mistakes, the remnants of a life he had shattered beyond repair. He had never imagined it would end like this. He had never thought that the lies, the betrayal, would spiral so out of control. But here he was, a man who had destroyed everything for a fleeting moment of desire and escape. A man who had lost everything that mattered. He stood by the window in the living room, staring out at the dark sky. It was a cold, starless night, the air thick with the heaviness of what was to come. The last remnants of hope that had clung to him like a fragile thread had snapped. And now there was nothing left but the darkness. Nicole had texted him earlier, but he hadn't responded. He couldn't. How could he? How could he continue this twisted game when everything was falling apart? Shanann had already made her decision, and the children. They didn't deserve any of this. They didn't deserve a father who was willing to sacrifice them all for his own selfish desires. Chris's phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. He stared at the screen for a moment before slowly reaching for it, his hands trembling. It was a message from Nicole. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? I'm worried." He stared at the message, feeling a pang of guilt deep in his chest. But the words didn't come. He didn't know what to say to her. He didn't know how to explain that he had already destroyed his life, that there was no going back. A loud noise from upstairs broke his reverie. Chris's heart skipped a beat as he looked toward the stairs. He couldn't place the sound at first, but then it came again. The sound of someone sobbing. And without thinking, Chris moved toward the stairs, his legs moving on their own accord, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled. As he ascended the stairs, the sound of her crying grew louder, and with it, a sinking feeling in his chest. When he reached the top of the stairs, he saw Shanann sitting in the bedroom doorway. Her back was hunched, her head buried in her hands as she wept silently, her shoulders shaking with every sob. The sight of her, so broken, so vulnerable, tore through Chris like 1,000 shards of glass. He took a step toward her, but she didn't look up. She didn't even acknowledge his presence. She was consumed by her grief, and he had no right to interrupt that. Shanann, his voice was low, hoarse, filled with an emotion he couldn't name. There was a brief pause before he spoke again, his words trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for any of this." Shannon's shoulders stiffened at the sound of his voice, but she didn't look at him. She didn't even move. The silence between them was suffocating, a chasm that no words could bridge. She had heard all his apologies, all his promises, and none of them had been enough. "I don't care about your apologies, Chris," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What you did, I'll never forgive you for it." The words were like a slap to his face. He had known they were coming, had known deep down that this was the inevitable outcome, but it still hit him harder than anything. Chris stepped back, the weight of her rejection crushing him. For a moment, he just stood there, paralyzed by the enormity of it all. He had ruined everything. He had ruined her. He had ruined them all. "I don't know what to do anymore," Chris said, his voice barely audible. "I'm lost. I don't know who I am. I don't know how to fix this." Shanann finally looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. The anger and pain in her gaze were unmistakable. She stood up slowly, her body trembling, but there was a strength in her now, a resolve that Chris hadn't seen before. "You can't fix this, Chris," she said, her voice firm despite the tears that still flowed down her face. "It's too late. You've already destroyed everything. You can't fix it." For the first time in what felt like forever, Chris felt something inside him break. The weight of her words, the finality in her tone, it was as if the last shred of hope he had been clinging to had disintegrated. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. But this time, it sounded even more hollow, because he knew now that no apology, no explanation, could undo what he had done. Shanann wiped the tears from her eyes and looked at him one last time. There was a moment of silence between them, a heavy, unbearable pause. Then she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Chris standing in the doorway, feeling more alone than he ever had in his life. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway, and Chris was left standing there, paralyzed as the silence of the house enveloped him. He felt the weight of everything pressing down on him, the guilt, the shame, the anger, and, for the first time, it was too much to bear. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. It was all collapsing too fast. And then, for the first time in days, Chris's phone buzzed again. Another message from Nicole. He stared at the screen for a long time before he finally opened it. "Chris, please. I don't know where you are, but I need to talk to you. This is getting out of control." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't deal with this. Not now. Not after everything. He typed a quick response. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." He hit send and dropped the phone on the floor. It was over. Everything was over. There was no turning back from this point. In the quiet of the house, with the weight of his decisions bearing down on him, Chris knew one thing for certain. He had lost everything, and there was no way out. The house was still, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant creak of floorboards. Chris stood in the living room, his gaze fixed on the ground, his mind numb from everything that had transpired. The weight of his choices, the lies, the betrayal, the crushing decisions had finally caught up with him. There was no escaping it. No more running. The air felt thick, suffocating. Every breath he took seemed to get heavier, as though the very walls were closing in on him. He looked around the room, the once warm, familiar space now, a cold reminder of everything he had lost, everything he had destroyed. The silence was unbearable. It pressed in on him, suffocated him. It was the silence of a life shattered, a family torn apart. It was the silence of a man who had taken everything for granted and now had nothing left. Chris walked slowly to the window, staring out into the dark night. The streets were empty, the only movement the flickering of distant streetlights. Everything was so quiet, too quiet. He wondered if this was what his life had become, tea and cold, devoid of meaning. How did I get here? The question echoed in his mind, over and over. How did he get to this point? The lies, the affairs, the deceptions, they had all started small, like cracks in a foundation, unnoticed at first. But now, those cracks had become chasms, swallowing everything in their path. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was another message from Nicole. "I'm scared, Chris. I need you to tell me what's going on, please." Chris stared at the message for a long moment. His fingers hovered over the screen, but he didn't know what to say. How could he explain to her that he had already lost everything? How could he tell her that the life he had with Shanann and the girls was over, and there was no way to fix it? A sudden knock at the door broke through the tension. Chris flinched, startled by the noise. He hadn't expected anyone. His heart raced as he approached the door, unsure of who it could be. He opened it slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing on the other side was a police officer, Mr. Watts. The officer asked, his voice calm but firm, "We need to talk to you." Chris's stomach dropped. His heart seemed to stop as the officer's words sank in. He knew, in that moment, that his life had reached its end. "About what?" Chris asked, trying to steady his shaking voice. "There's been an investigation into the disappearance of your wife, Shanann Watts, and your two daughters, Bella and Celeste," the officer said, his gaze sharp as he looked at Chris. "We need you to come down to the station for questioning." Chris's mind raced. He could feel the room spinning around him, the air thick with dread. He had to fight the urge to panic, to scream, to run. But he knew there was no running from this. There was no escaping what was coming. I don't know where they are," Chris stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. They're gone. Shanann's gone, and the girls." His voice trailed off as the officer's gaze grew more intense, more searching. The officer stepped forward, his hand resting on the doorframe. "Mr. Watts, we have reason to believe that your wife and daughters did not just disappear on their own. We need to ask you some questions." Chris's stomach churned. He could feel the sweat beading on his forehead, his palms clammy with fear. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. I didn't do anything," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't hurt them. I don't know where they are." The officer studied him for a moment before nodding. "We'll need you to come with us. We're going to take you downtown." Chris stood frozen for a moment, his entire world spinning out of control. The officer's words echoed in his mind, "We believe you know where they are." And in that moment, it all came crashing down on him. The lies, the deception, the affair with Nicolette was all leading to this. The truth was coming, whether he was ready for it or not. "I'll get my things," Chris said weakly, barely able to form the words. His voice sounded foreign to him, distant, as though someone else was speaking. The officer stepped back as Chris turned toward the living room. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced. There was no escape from this. He had taken everything from Shanann, from the girls, And now there was no one left to hide behind. The truth would come out. As Chris gathered his things, the reality of the situation settled in. He had to face the consequences of his actions. There was no getting around it. Shanann was gone, the girls were gone, and he had been the one to make it happen. By the time he reached the door, the officers were waiting for him, their expressions grim. The weight of the situation was overwhelming. Chris felt like a puppet on strings, unable to control the path his life had taken. "Mr. Watts, we have to get going," one of the officers said, his voice stern. Chris nodded, unable to speak. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed in his ears. The night air was cold against his skin, but it did nothing to numb the ache inside him. His world was unraveling, and there was no going back. The drive to the police station was silent. Chris sat in the back of the squad car, his hands clasped tightly together, his thoughts a blur of guilt, fear, and confusion. He couldn't believe it was happening. He couldn't believe that he was sitting here, about to face the consequences of everything he had done. When they arrived at the station, Chris was led into an interrogation room, where a detective sat waiting for him. The detective's expression was unreadable, his eyes cold and steady as he watched Chris take a seat. "Mr. Watts, we have a lot of questions for you," the detective said. "And I'm afraid you're not going anywhere until we get some answers." The door clicked shut behind Chris, and for the first time in days, he felt truly alone. His world had collapsed. The family he had destroyed, the lies he had told, everything was crashing down around him, and there was no way out.